Good Tuesday morning, everyone. I'm meteorologist Jacob Wycoff, joined by our executive weather producer here at WBZ in Boston, Terry Eliasen. Terry, this time yesterday, when you joined us on YouTube, on our stream, CBS News Boston, we were talking about a Category 4 storm. It did increase, and then it decreased a little bit. Still a very dangerous storm in the Gulf of Mexico.
Absolutely. So yesterday, it ended up strengthening to one of the strongest, most deep systems that we've seen, one of the most in history, really. Right. And thankfully, overnight, it could not sustain itself, and now we're back to a Category 4, still a very powerful storm.
Absolutely. So it underwent what we call a eyewall replacement cycle. If you tuned in yesterday, it was a
pinpoint eye, yes.
Yeah, pinhole eye. And what we see with the strongest storms is they go through this eyewall replacement cycle and double the size of the eyewall. What that means to you at home, still a very dangerous storm. So let's hop into some of our headlines. This is the strongest Gulf hurricane on record for October and November. I think that's an incredible stat.
Yeah, and that's, again, when it was at its strongest yesterday. That's when that stat really is from. It has weakened somewhat, but still it will go down in history as the strongest Gulf hurricane on record, you know, with that 185-mile-an-hour winds that existed yesterday.
And it was also incredibly deep. I know that the hurricane hunters, they had seen below 900 millibar pressures.
That's something you just don't see in the Atlantic very often, and we have a chart coming up actually to show you just how rare that is.
And so this also underwent the second fastest intensification on record from Category 1 to 5. I think it was less than 10 hours, something like that?
Yes, about 10 hours, which is really, in fact, I can't even fathom. You know, you're talking about the amount of intensification that has to go on to get from a 1 to a 5 is just remarkable.
Right. How
fast that happened.
This is also only 5 other seasons have had 2 Category 5 storms. We had one earlier this season. That was Beryl. It was a major hurricane. And now we have Milton. No longer a Category 5 storm, but as I was mentioning, Carrie.
Yeah, so yesterday it got down to 897 millibars, and that, again, is number 5 for this is the entire Atlantic basin, including the Gulf of Mexico, in the history of recorded hurricanes in the Atlantic. The 5th lowest pressure on record or strongest storm on record. That's just remarkable.
It really, really is a sign of just how strong, how intense this is. Again, it has weakened. I don't want to put any, I don't want you to think this is all good news. It isn't as strong as it once was, I guess.
Literally was off of our charts yesterday when it reached 185 miles an hour. And now it's back to sort of a reason. It's still a major hurricane, but something that we're more used to seeing. 150-mile-an-hour winds still are very destructive, something very powerful. But yesterday was just off the charts. And we do not think it's going to get back to where it was yesterday. That was probably, it has reached its peak, and it's now going to be probably somewhere in the Category 3-4 range going forward.
Absolutely. In fact, the National Hurricane Center in its latest observation, latest forecast, keeps it at about 150 miles per hour for the next couple of hours before perhaps weakening a little bit as it does approach. And we're crossing our fingers that is the case. Here's the latest track. Here are the watches and warnings that are currently up. You see basically from just north of Cedar Key all the way down to Fort Myers and Naples, we do have hurricane warnings posted, but those hurricane warnings posted also extend inland to the Atlantic side. So you're talking about the seacoast, and as you go up towards Daytona Beach, Orlando, and sort of the middle of Florida under that hurricane warning.
I mean, look at that. Basically, almost the entire state of Florida in either a hurricane warning or a tropical storm warning, from Jacksonville all the way down to Key West.
Yep.
And I think you mentioned it, as the hurricane gets closer, it will start to expand and get larger, and that wind field will expand, and therefore, again, you could have hurricane force winds easily for that entire red stretch there through the middle of Florida. And so, actually, you know, that last couple of frames actually are starting to look a little bit more compact as that eyewall replacement has completed. So you'll see that you kind of don't see through the eyewall for a while there, and then the very last frame or two that the eye kind of becomes apparent again, and that
starts to poke out a little bit more.
Yeah, so it's a sign of perhaps a little bit of re-strengthening, and it's getting its act together again as it starts to move away from the Yucatan.
Now, one thing with this storm that I think is somewhat unique when we think about some of the more memorable storms, Katrina's and the Wilma's, in fact, this has been compared to Wilma because of the size of the pinhole eye for the first part of the storm. It is still pretty compact. It's still, when you talk about tropical storms, when you talk about major hurricanes, 300, 400, 500 miles wide. This isn't as big right now, but It will expand. It may double in size by the time it does eventually reach the Florida coastline.
These are visible satellite imagery when you get storms like this. It's just so fun to monitor, and you can see in that last couple of frames the almost like the height of the clouds on the north and west side start to like increase and bubble up again. I think again that's a sign the eye has reformed, it's re-strengthened, and now the eye wall around the eye is getting some pretty nasty, thunderstorm development around it.
Yep.
Just a remarkable sort of thing to watch. This visible satellite imagery will, you could watch it all the way through and just continue to watch the eye wall, sort of having a mind of its own.
Yeah, someone posted yesterday on our YouTube page that they enjoyed us talking about this visible satellite because it was like almost like meteorologists on the HGTV talking about the textures. Yeah. So yes, we enjoy textures as well. This is the latest, the stats on Hurricane Milton. On the 11 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center, did keep the wind at 150 miles per hour. The pressure fairly steady at the moment, 929, and it is moving to the northeast at 9 miles per hour, just to the north there of Cancun, and you see Mexico. It's not expected to make any sort of landfall before it makes landfall heading towards Florida.
Yeah, and again, a Cat 5 storm starts at 156-mile-an-hour wind, so we are just below the Cat 5 threshold. It's forecast to kind of hover right around there for the next 24 to 36 hours. Not out of the question it could strengthen into a Cat 5 again, but it's sort of semantics. We're at the 150-mile-an-hour winds versus 156. It's a very
still a deadly
storm either way. Yeah,
absolutely.
Latest track, very similar to yesterday, frankly. Just a hair, maybe just a hair further south. So that center line, you can see now going through really the southern part of Tampa Bay. And yesterday it was more sort of directly through. And these little jogs literally could be 5 or 10 miles north or south, make a huge difference.
Yeah, so we have a graphic coming up that really shows, and we can explain that a little bit differently, but yes, miles matter. I think the takeaway in all of this is if you are in the path of this storm, and local officials have said you are in an area that is prone to flooding, or maybe perhaps not even prone to flooding, but you haven't seen a storm like this in the past. Heed those evacuation warnings. Yes, traffic is horrendous right now, but do what you need to stay safe. It's really of the utmost importance.
And you can see the forecast is for a Cat 3 storm making landfall in Tampa, which, again, relative good news considering now it's close to a Cat 5. So the forecast is still for some gradual weakening.
Yep. Still a major hurricane.
Still a major hurricane, though. Still something to be, nothing to sneeze at, but certainly better that way than the other way. You don't want to see it strengthen as it makes landfall. Yep. So hurricane hunters. These folks, I mean, heroes have been flying in and out of this thing now repeatedly for the last couple of days, and we just got, so when we get these advisories, like we did at 11 o'clock with the latest pressure, the latest winds, this is basically where we're getting it from. These folks, carving in and out of the storm, and, the latest surface pressure, 925.
So, as you said, perhaps strengthening as they continue to fly in. They drop dropsondes, which are basically little instrument packs that go from the plane down into the ocean and report back what those instrument packs have measured. We've also recently started dropping drones into these hurricanes to hopefully get some additional data. But the National Hurricane Center and the NOAA Hurricane Hunters, they actually tweeted a video inside the flight station. This is what they saw aboard Miss Piggy. That's the plane that they fly into Hurricane Milton. Definitely some heavy turbulence. I can't imagine some of the turbulence. And let's just listen if we could. Yep, a little bump there.
They look so calm.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would be as calm if I was in the pilot's
seat. Be hanging on to something.
But they also, when they fly at night, a sign of strengthening is the amount of lightning that they saw, and they were able to see quite a bit of lightning from the pilot's seat. Check out what they saw overnight. You see all those flashes of lightning. I can't imagine all the bumps and then just illuminated with lightning.
Something straight out of a horror movie, frankly.
Yes.
But this is sort of like it's their job. It's their everyday, this is what they do.
Yep.
And if you talk to them, and we have several times, it's sort of like second nature for them. They don't, they hop in. They know they're going into the belly of the beast, and you know they're ready for anything that goes down in there.
If they're watching this, call me. I want to go. I want to fly.
Yeah, I think you would be great in there.
I don't know if I'd be great. I would be willing to try
I would love
it.
to see you from here. I watch you from afar.
Okay, good to know. And I think we have one more video that they filmed aboard Miss Piggy. This is the eye from Milton as viewed from the flight deck. And I talked about this yesterday. This is sort of the stadium effect. Notice how there's sort of the bowl. Think about like walking on Gillette Stadium, right? You're walking from under the stands onto the field. You have the stands all around you. That is what the eye sort of looks like. And this, I think, probably was during maybe the start or end of one of the eyewall replacement cycles, because you really don't see the blue skies above. Normally, in a very strong eye, you would see the blue skies, the sunshine above, but you see just incredible stuff. I can't imagine flying there with the hurricane.
Would you call that a bucket list item for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's put it on the bucket list.
All right, yeah. It is on the bucket list for sure.
Getting back to just some of the parameters and the reasoning for strengthening versus weakening, really the two main things are the surface water temperatures and the amount of shear in the atmosphere.
Yeah, the water feeds into hurricanes or takes away energy from hurricanes.
Right, exactly. And all the water in the Gulf right now is very, very warm. Really, almost some of it is record-setting warm.
Yep.
And so that's one of the main reasons why yesterday we saw that intense and just insane strengthening and rapid intensification. And today you'll see the path takes it through, I guess you could say, some quote-unquote cooler waters. It's going from the 88 to 90s into the 84, 86 degree water. Either way, that's not going to be nothing's going to slow it down water-wise.
Yeah, so two things that I want to point out. Notice the water right off the coast of Tampa, that it is still 88 to 90 degrees. The concern perhaps that the hurricane forecasters are going to be watching for is, does it show that last burst of energy? That'll be something to watch for. Hurricanes the last few years have shown a bit of strengthening right before making landfall. But I also want to point your attention to, just off the western coast of that, or western side of that, the sort of red stripe there, can you zoom in?
West of Tampa, yeah.
West of Tampa, that the hurricane goes through. That's actually the wake, the turbulence kind of carved up by Helene about 2 weeks ago. So Helene, even though it is no longer a storm, it is playing a role secondarily to what we're kind of seeing there play out with.
And that happens quite a bit with multiple hurricanes going over the same area. When a hurricane goes over an ocean area, it churns the ocean up massively.
Big time,
and so and that upwelling, was what it's called, brings cooler ocean water to the surface. And that's obviously something that hurricanes don't like. So secondarily to that is the wind shear. And I think this is a big part of the reason why we saw some weakening overnight, is it's currently going through a bit of wind shear in the atmosphere. That red sort of purplish area just basically denotes a little bit of turbulence for the storm, if you will, in the upper layers of the atmosphere, some wind shear. And so what we think is that that's probably a main reason why it's had some issues or gone from 185 mile an hour yesterday to 150 today. And it's still undergoing some of that wind shear even during the day today. Yeah,
the wind shear can effectively kind of cut a hurricane in half. But we don't expect it to be that major of a concern for this storm. Sadly, we would love to see this cut in half. The last storm to really impact places like Fort Myers, even Tampa, the way that this one is going to, was Ian a couple of years ago. Absolutely devastating to Fort Myers, Naples, Port Charlotte, Fort Myers Beach. This is going to take more of a northerly track. So still, some of the same areas will be impacted.
I know some folks that live down in Bonita Springs. My wife went down there and she described the scene. This was last year, a year after Ian had gone through. The scene along the Fort Myers Beach area, just as devastating. There were still ships thrown up into the mangroves, like on the other side of the street. Like, it's just so hard to recover. It takes years to recover from storms like this. And now, even if Milton is a little bit farther north, those same areas from Port Charlotte down to Bonita are still going to have quite a blow from this one, you know, and these are areas that are just trying to recover from 2 years ago.
Recover from 2 years ago, and also recover from Helene. I've seen a few press conferences from Tampa.
Yep.
They've got trash piles on the sides of roads.
Yep.
The governor, the local officials, they're really encouraging people figure out a way to get rid of it because it's just going to turn into debris in water.
And check this out. I find this fascinating. You think, I mean, over the last, so basically since the satellite era, basically since about 1950, all these dots on the Florida coastline are hurricane landfalls that have occurred. And you would think so we're talking about 75 years basically. You would think just about every square inch of Florida has been decimated by a hurricane at one point or another in the last 75 years. Well, look at the Tampa, so that Milton forecast, basically, if you take Tampa and go, say, 50 miles north and south, they have not had a landfalling hurricane in that area since the satellite era began. That's fascinating.
It's very fascinating. Yeah, you think of Tampa, the amount of economic growth that has happened in those 50 to 75 years. On the other side, too, that also surprises me. That's, you know, the Daytona Beach area. That's Orlando area. So basically from Palm Beach all the way up to Tallahassee, they haven't really seen too much.
I guess when you think about the hurricane tracks, typically they come across the Atlantic from east to west, and they'll either barrel into southern Florida or they'll take a turn up the coast. Very rarely do they sort of get up to central Florida and go inland. It's kind of a rare thing. And this one obviously was coming out of the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, but, going from west to east.
But just interesting to note that there's literally never been a landfalling hurricane, in the satellite era in the Tampa area.
Yep,
So.
I think I read the last one was about 100 years ago.
That's remarkable.
Incredible.
So actually, if you think about it, we've had here in Massachusetts we had Hurricane Bob. 1991 was our last landfalling hurricane. So we've had, I guess, more experience, you would say, than Tampa. I mean, kind of fascinating. Storm surge will definitely be probably the most devastating part of this whole event. And right now, these are the current estimates from the National Hurricane Center: 10 to 15-foot storm surge for that wide-ranging area, basically including Tampa, Sarasota, Clearwater. Hard to describe or even imagine what a 10 to 15-foot storm surge looks like.
Yeah, it's really hard to imagine. We saw that, though, with Helene. We saw those type of numbers, in some places even higher than that with Helene. But it's really...
The slight difference there is those were fairly remote areas that were getting that storm surge. And, so now we're talking about a major city with perhaps a foot or more of storm surge coming in. And again, this all depends on that center track, as you say. A little jog north or south will have major differences in impact, from city to city along the west coast of Florida.
So this is our latest futurecast model showing the storm continuing to churn through the Gulf of Mexico. By Wednesday night, some of those outer and even inner rain bands starting to move through really the heart of Florida, and then eventually making a landfall somewhere, let's say around midnight, perhaps just after midnight, and then go through the middle, central Florida, Orlando, all the theme parks would be impacted Thursday morning, and then this should scoot out of there pretty quickly. Now notice the back edge of this. As this continues to kind of move from the west to the east, we may actually see some additional flooding north of the track. Look at some of these totals, though, Terry.
Yeah, I mean, so you're talking, again, 6 to 12 inches of water from Tampa to Cedar Key, Daytona, Orlando. Florida, similar to almost Cape Cod, it doesn't flood real easily. A lot of it just runs off. So I feel like the rainfall totals, while remarkable, aren't going to be they're certainly down the list somewhere of the major concerns from this one. Yeah,
it's really the wind. It's really the storm surge. I would say this would be, like you said, a lot, but secondarily to some of the others. The wind potential also really incredible. When you have wind potential over 110 miles per hour from Spring Hill to Tampa, to St. Petersburg to Sarasota, all the way down into Fort Myers, that's incredible. That's a big wind swath that will be moving into the area. This is the wind field for Milton, the heart of it, kind of going right through Tampa. In a series of bad scenarios, I would say what the National Hurricane Center currently is forecasting is the best of a lot of bad scenarios for Tampa, that is.
Right, with the landfall being just to the south side. Yeah,
yes.
Again, that certainly will be tweaked. That exact landfall will be tweaked in the next 24 to 48 hours. But the other thing is, Another unfortunate part, the landfall happening at night, and that happened again with Helene. Like, makes it a little even more scary to those folks down there. Hopefully, everybody's evacuated and is out of their homes that are in jeopardy. But a landfall like that happening at night, just even more dramatic, I guess you would say.
So I wanted to show this. This is just one example of some of the gusts that we may see. Starting at 9 p.m. Wednesday, you're talking 50 to 65 mile per hour gust. Watch as we go into the overnight. Like Terry said, the walls are going to be screaming around people's businesses and homes. 90 plus mile per hour wind gust, and then even stronger through 1 a.m., stronger as you go inland through 4 a.m. and then you can actually see the eye on this model go through parts of Bartow and then go up towards Orlando before it finally exits. I put this map together. I think it's a really, as you said, Terry, this is a good indication of where the track is and where Tampa Bay is. So Tampa on the north side of that track. That means more offshore wind. So basically moving from inland away from towards the ocean, that is. That's less storm surge flooding, but more rainfall. On the south side, from basically Sarasota down to Port Charlotte, I would expect that to be some of the worst storm surge.
If that indeed is the final track and that holds, absolutely. And you could see, like we mentioned yesterday, parts of Tampa Bay actually emptying out with the wind funneling offshore. Another strange phenomenon with a landfall like that. But this is really it. This is what it comes down to, the exact landfall and where it happens. Yeah,
so we're going to be watching this very closely. I'll have the latest forecast coming up on WBZ coming up in just a little bit. Eric Fisher will be in the Weather Center this afternoon and evening. Let's just hope everyone is heeding those evacuation orders, doing what they need to stay safe. We'll be here up in the Northeast tracking this and trying to do what we can to spread all the information, all the good information that we can up here. That's the latest. Jacob Wycoff, Terry Eliasen. Stay safe out there.